Cool. All right, well, what I've got for you today is just a little case study about GeoNet and their recent Agile adoption story. And if you don't know GeoNet, then they're in the business of earthquakes and tsunamis and volcanoes and landslides. And I don't know if it's just me, but it seems that these events seem to be getting in the news more and more these days. It doesn't seem that long ago, although it was 2004, the Boxing Day quake and tsunami was obviously a really huge event. And then following on, I don't know who else watched in 2011 on television when the tsunami came in Japan and the aftermath with Fukushima and that kind of thing. And then we had all that flight disruption and with Iceland, with the volcano and stuff there. And then just this year we've had that devastating earthquake just in Mexico City. And then closer to home, we've had obviously a couple of events in Christchurch and Kaikoura. We've got White Island, which is always continuously chugging away, and we've had the landslide events that have come out of Kaikoura. And in the Manawatu, we're now looking at a big, massive infrastructure project because it's not stable to put that road through there anymore. And even here in Wellington, with Ngaio Gorge and Nauronga Gorge, we've seen how much disruption the landslides make. So these four natural hazards are certainly in the limelight. And I mean, we all know from high school and intermediate school that New Zealand is a fairly new country, and sitting on, as we do, on the edge of two plates, the Australia plate and the Pacific plate. And down south it's the Australia plate, which is slowly diving down below the Pacific plate, and then further to the north, up in the Bay of Plenty, it's the other way round, where the Pacific plate is being pushed up. And then in the middle of the country, what we have is actually a bit of a sideways movement going on, a bit all over the place. So given that we know this is happening and that we live in the ring of fire, this is something that we want to keep track of and monitor. So I just want to have a little look at how that's been done in the past. And this is from a little video that GeoNet put together. And back in the 80s, there literally was a guy named Murray, and it was his job to locate all the earthquakes in New Zealand. And what he would do is he'd sit at home and he'd wait till he got a call from a reporter that they'd felt an earthquake nearby, and then Murray would get on his bicycle and cycle into the Wellington seismograph, where he would get the film out of the seismograph. And for millennials, that might be a concept they don't understand, but it takes time to process. And then what he would do is from that graph that would get out, he would get, based on that one seismograph, he would know how far away the quake was from Wellington. And then he would have to rely on the actual location of the reporter to figure out where the earthquake was. So, back in the days of decentralised news, having reporters in every town and city was actually really useful to Murray. So if he was really lucky, then he might find out, he'd go to one of the farmers which had a seismograph on his farm and get them to give him some readings. And all up, it could take a few hours to get a really imprecise earthquake location. To get a precise location, he would actually have to wait for the farmers to take the film out of the seismographs, put them in envelopes and post them into Wellington, where he would then go through and develop them again, and then he could hope that they weren't tied up with lambing or a storm or something like that. And from that, he could actually calculate a precise location. So back in the 80s, there were 30 machines, and they were mainly located around Wellington and the Central Plateau. And this process of locating earthquakes was really slow and fragile. And with the risk of potential losses from an earthquake event ever mounting, it was recognised that something needed to be done to improve our understanding and monitoring of these events. And so back in 2001, the Earthquake Commission, Land Information New Zealand and GNS formed GeoNet as a response to this need. And their goal back then was simply, it was four parts, was to improve the coverage of the devices up and down the country, get some better communication links so they didn't have to rely on the courier services, improve their capability to detect and monitor volcanoes, and to provide open access to data for researchers, engineers, and the insurance community to help with their work along with monitoring these 4 hazards for the civil defence emergency management sector. So fast forward to today, and they have over 600 sites up and down the country. And from many of these now, data is streaming in real time, all the time back to GeoNet, where it is processed, packaged, and made available to researchers via a number of different data services. And as you can see, these, they're far and wide now, and some of them are quite hard to get to. Most notably, if you look right at the top of the right-hand corner, is Roe Island, and we'll have a little discussion about that one in a moment. Being a GeoNet field tech is a pretty cool job. If you want to be a professional tramper, you get to go some pretty sweet spots. Here he's setting up a GPS streaming device, and your mode of work is actually pretty good as well. This is Andy, who's actually one of the product owners on my project, and one of the challenges we'd have is trying to keep him out of helicopters in the office so that we could actually work on projects together. So, they've got the devices in the field, and then they have teamed that up now with some better processing capability to the fact that they can get location to your website and app in under 5 minutes. And one question that I asked, and I know other people, is why does the magnitudes reading keep changing after an event? And if you think about it, the reason being is it's because it takes time for that wave to propagate out and to be read by the devices. And the larger the event, you actually need those readings from further afield to actually make sense of it. If we were to have a magnitude 8.5 here and test the structural rigidity of Te Papa, none of the devices in New Zealand would actually be able to tell you that location, because all of them would just seem like a really big quake. So yeah, just a little bit in the behind there. Powering all this is some really good cutting edge, like DevOps mentality and software stack. They have, they're using Golang for all their building, sharing all their code by GitHub. They share everything open access. You can actually grab the code from their GitHub repos. They're doing code review. They're using Puppet for configuration, and it's all cloud native. So it's all good, right? Well, then this happened, and then shortly after again, and as well documented, the events occurred on a new fault line, and the damage was awful. There was loss of buildings, there was disruption to everyday life, and tragically 185 people lost their lives during the February quake. For GeoNet, the workload started backing up. It was a new fault, people wanted new data, they wanted new equipment in the field so they could start further, doing forecasting and that kind of thing. The engineers wanted new and different types of data so they could better understand how to build things. All of this work is potentially life-saving. All of it is, saving investment and incomes. So all of it was urgent. And plus, at this time, it wasn't the only event that they were having to worry about. There was a magnitude 8 earthquake in Chile that caused massive tsunami warnings and some work having to be there. There were rainstorms in Kapiti and Hutt Valley which caused a lot of land subsidence and landslides, etc. And then good old White Island still puffing away, always an ever-present danger to aviation. So basically with that workload increasing, their current model of trying to get projects and development work through their pipeline needed to change. And so how could they were looking at ways to get these two departments, the volcanology and the seismic people, working together more cohesively to make change. And so that's where we came in, and we ran some training, and we ran a trial run with just the team leaders and department heads, and the verdict was there was something in this. So we could have gone down the traditional route of just having those team leaders then take that information on and pass it organically, but that workload was backing up. So a call was made to take everyone on this journey, and so we ran some more training. And some more training, this time with the developers and with the field techs and operational scientists and data analysts and the network operators and the public comms people and even their PAs. And I always use their PA as a real success story. She's the one who actually organises the show. She's now got personal Kanbans for the HR process and contract review, etc. And she's actually a netball coach, and so she's been running mad, sad, glad reviews after every loss of her game. And so what we have now is a situation here where, if this is everyone working for GeoNet, we've got all of them are certified Agile professionals. Well, almost. There's one little blight on there, and his name's Shahan, and he's the new guy. So we'll get him through shortly. But the thing about this is that now this organisation has a shared common language. Everyone has worked through this training together, and they all understand the jargon and language that we use. So blockers, spikes, demos, retros. And it means that some of them may never work on a Scrum team, but they will understand when their colleagues are pulled into a cross-functional team what the needs and requirements are. And thinking about your own organisations, just how many people do you think have been, some organisations will be better than others, but imagine everyone could have that same shared language and go through that same common experience. So, excellent. We got everyone with some skills, and so let's start applying this. And there was lots of enthusiasm, but then this happened, and what we really mean is all of this. And of course, now that workload is really starting to get out of hand, and to the point that we'd actually reached an impasse, a situation where no progress was possible because we couldn't figure out what was important. So everything was urgent, everything was important, and we had some teams working 16, 20-hour days trying to answer the need, while other teams, like the developers who could make it easier by automating things, were idle because there was no one to feed them work. So before Christmas last year, we came in and we just asked a simple question. Let's just keep it simple. Let's model the workflow. And so we took all of this and we found an empty room that was being used for storage, and we pushed the desks over to one side and we broke out the Post-its and the masking tape, and we just started building a Kanban. Okay? And things were starting to get a little bit out of hand when we had to go to the second wall. And you can see up there's 5 pieces of white paper on the floor that was still going up. There was another 5 on the other side of the room. So straight away, just by visualizing this problem, they were learning that they were in not such a good state and there was something to be done. And so we were able to start refining that board, and luckily we were able to start just weeding things out and get it down to one wall, and separating out those BAU tasks in the green there. So that is great now. So the team managers have got some situational awareness. They can actually start making some decisions. They can see that progress is being made, which was actually kind of hidden from them in the past. The great thing was it's super lightweight. It was easy to update. The tool itself was not creating any additional work or overhead for people. But our problem is that it was seen as an activity done by the team leaders and the director of GeoNet because we're off in this room to the side. So we took advantage of the Anzac Day holiday and that Monday, which everyone took off, and we moved it into their common area. So behind the camera is the kitchen where everyone makes their coffees. And so now the Kanban was in plain sight. Everyone in the division had to walk past this every day, and they could see where their work is and they could track it on the board. And they could start asking questions. And we moved the weekly work in progress meeting into this room as well. And we changed that from being a rambling discussion about what's hard, what can't we do, that kind of thing, into more stand-up style. And as a result, we've managed to cut down the time of that team meeting from 2 to 3 hours down to 30 to 45 minutes. And this is really important because those team leaders, they're not managers, they're the first. They have this phrase, first amongst equals. They're actually people who need to do work. So if I can get them an hour and a half back in their week, that's a huge thing for GeoNet. Cool. The next thing we had was that the requests kept coming in, and so we had to generate another area to acknowledge them. And so you'll see on the right-hand side there's a big green post-it that says not now. And this is probably the most empowering part for them, was when we started teaching them to say no. They could start bringing in internal stakeholders, people from across the hall who are doing the science and the research, people from EQC and LINS who are asking for work, and go, here you go, this is what we got on. What are we going to take off so we can work on your pet project? So it's cool. Things were starting to flow, albeit slowly, but we still had this problem where we weren't sure what we should be working on first. As I said before, everything was potentially life-saving. So how do you make that judgment call about what's the first thing to do? So what we need to do is just start defining some finish lines and figuring out how we can make progress. And so that's where we started bringing in the impact mapping and the goal setting. And in the centre of this here, you'll see we've got 3 goals, and 2 of them are constraints. We've still got to keep putting the earthquake information up there in under 5 minutes. We've got to detect volcanic eruption in under 30 minutes. But the top one is that we had 8 full-time equivalents just working the whole time constructing CSV files for other researchers. I don't know, if you do a PhD in seismology, you don't think that your day job is going to be like copying and pasting in Microsoft Excel. So what we're trying to do is free up their time so they could come and work on other things. And here we go, here's another version of the map. Now, one thing that's quite cool about their building, it's the old film unit, and so that's all sound deadening material on the walls, so it's just great for using for pinboards everywhere. We ran this activity, the mapping, and then we just did some simple dot voting around effort and value, and from that we got our top 5, and then we could narrow that down from those 15 pages that we had to 5 things that we could actually start doing and start aligning through to our goals. But it was still seen as a management activity, so once again we moved that as well. We moved the map, and so now I'm really getting a bad reputation as a really low quality interior decorator. But everyone walks past this area, and everyone can see where their piece of work relates through to the goals that GeoNet's trying to achieve. And it starts promoting questions and discussion. And we had scientists and management from other sides of GeoNet and other institutions coming in and trying to find their stuff on the map. And our message was simple, that if you couldn't find it, then it wasn't important to us. And so maybe we're not going to do it, or maybe you need to have a discussion about how we need to change the map. And just keep in mind that we're likely to say no right now. Cool, so now we had a common language and we had a way of prioritising work. It's time to just get some stuff done. And unfortunately, this just isn't the simple matter of getting some people in a room to write some software. This is a project which has its own challenges. So remember that station up, Row Island? That's crucial for warning a Pacific tsunami. And if the big one hits, then it comes past Row Island. We've still got enough time to alert people in New Zealand to do some evacuation in Bay of Plenty and Auckland areas. But it's a long way away, and so you have to wait for the Navy to decide that they're going to sail past, because otherwise it's $250,000 to send a boat there and back. So we weren't going to iterate over our deployments there, but we did have one of the field techs who was going, and he started doing his planning, and he was told that he only had so much space and he had to prioritise what he could take. So he was quite proud. He showed me his Kanban that he was using, and excellent. It was pretty simple. He had to do, doing, and done. And I noticed there was only one card in the done column, rum. And so, true to form, he's living it. He's put his highest priority, and he'd also been living up to that inspect and adapt philosophy, because at the top of the to-do pile was more rum. So, getting his priorities straight. The weather is a big one for us, and so there are a lot of the sites can only be got to in the summer months. So. That means that our subject matter experts, the people that we want to be product owners, leading the input into things like the site monitoring tools, are going to be out of the office in summer. So we really need to have to try and line up those windows for when they're going to be here. And this one here is, some of our problems are pretty unique. This one here is a new data logging infrastructure that we're working on that will be used to monitor the temperature and pressure and acidity of lakes, or landslide dams, volcanic lakes, and places where it's not safe to put people, really. So we've been doing some prototyping, and here's our prototype volcanic lake, which we can, it's got a big heater around it, so we can actually warm it up, and we can use pool acid to decrease the pH, and we've been testing sensors, etc. in there for temperature and conductivity, etc. But when it came to putting this thing into place, there were lots of ideas, and health and safety constraints came in. So we we looked at a number of alternatives and landed on an inflatable pontoon, which basically someone would walk along to the end and drop this into the water. And so we tested that, of course, not using one of our researchers. We waited for someone visiting from the Caribbean and sent them to the end. And that's great. So now we had a 3-month wait to get this thing built. In the meantime, health and safety said, you can't use that on any lake that's over 40 degrees centigrade. So we had to start working out a way that we could drop stuff off remotely. And so that led to some other tests. And in this one, Richard on the far end is celebrating prematurely because the lowering device actually got stuck and clogged. So we had to iterate again and build a new one. And out of this process, what I've learned is that the scientists are really good at collaborating in small groups where they all are in the same area. So these are all volcanologists working together. But they're not so good at cross-team collaboration. And anything that they're working on tends to be fairly closely held. And coupled with that, the science at the moment is, a lot of the research has been done is focused on get me the number, whereas, get me the number for this scenario, when what we're really trying to get them to do is build tools that will, a research product that we can feed things in and for different scenarios get different numbers and things out. So that requires different disciplines and different people to be involved. And traditionally, GeoNet was made up of teams that were fairly siloed. Network collects the data, platform puts it somewhere, dev transform it, etc. And we had some people working together, but not really. So a big focus now has been to form these cross-functional teams. And as someone who is a big fan of the DevOps movement, I'm stoked to see that the sysadmins are in every team. If we start a new project, there's someone in there. So it's what we're starting to see is that, and that was a requirement because everything is operational, everything goes into production. So let's bring those ops people in at the beginning of the journey and keep them along. I talked about before about the nature of science, and scientists have obviously a great culture of experimentation, but the target for their experimentation was often this, a published journal in a paper, somewhere, and the more prestigious the journal, the better. But that feedback loop is quite long, it can take months or years, and they often want to get to their level of perfection before they'll be prepared to publish. And that may be okay for research, but in operations, we're trying to get them to take small steps and compress that feedback loop. And so how can we help them, start slicing their work into smaller steps? And that's where things like story maps have been really useful for them, and breaking out these release lines and, continuing asking them, yes, I understand that that's where you want to be eventually, but what can we do today? What can we do next week? And in this case, we're working on some strong motion products for engineers, and we discovered that we could do something by dialing back the sampling level from 200 to 50 hertz and still get them something useful. And that was kind of a watershed moment for them. It's just that idea that they could take small steps and not be penalised for producing something that was not correct. These days now, we also have a culture of demonstrating everything. And so every Wednesday morning, there'll be a demo, and most of the division attends. And there'll be 2 or 3 projects presenting. And this has been huge for everyone in the group, just demystifying the work that's going on. So that whole team can actually see, they know there's been that huge workload and that, that there's pressures to get stuff done. And they can actually see things happening. So whilst it's been useful for the teams to get feedback on their projects, it's also been useful for the morale of everyone around just to see that progress is being made. So it's been good progress they've been making, and then unfortunately this guy came along and had a very public stoush with the director of GeoNet and over 24/7 operations. And the one thing that the Kaikoura event highlighted is that the public expectation for GeoNet has changed. It's no longer something that needs to be automated and just people can get woken up and give some feedback on. We want expert analysis and feedback then and there straight away. So whilst GeoNet still continues to over-deliver on their open access for data, people want to see this more comprehensive offering. And so that has changed things, but they now have some tools which they can use. That impact map on the right-hand side is now updated to reflect that 24/7, and they're going through and they're chipping away at what needs to be done for that one. And what we're seeing is this is starting to get, go further out from GNet and into GNS broader. So the Riskscape tool is all about modelling impact on infrastructure, and we can see that they're starting to use these same impact mapping tools to figure out what they should do next. The same with the aftershock forecasting and landslide warning. They're starting to come around to this idea that they are in the product development game and that they need to think about how they can ship things early and often and get that feedback, not think about their own version of what's perfect, thinking about that journal model and getting critiqued by other scientists. They need to get things out in the wild. So to recap, the success in the story has come from that shared common language, having everyone go through that training together and be able to, understand that mechanics and mindset. They've been visualizing their work in progress, but they've been doing it in public. Everyone can see what's going on. They've defined finish lines, and some of them, with intermediary steps, and they've been tracing all work to that goal. And if they can't trace it through to that goal, then they're just putting it through the floor. And they're showing stuff to people, they're getting stuff down, rinse, wash, repeat. So that's all I've got for today. So I'll be around if anyone has any questions about what's been happening at GeoNet or mountain biking. I'm quite happy to talk about that as well. So if anyone has any questions.